So Thursday night, I'm going to start a new series on free will, covering religious aspects of free will and philosophical aspects and some of the scientific aspects, which are intertwined. And that'll take us a while. And there will be other people from other groups that will join us. Yetz Hashem. And tomorrow night I have a wedding, so I'm not going to be here. But tonight I want to do something which I've mentioned in passing a number of times, and I haven't done it in a while. And since it is really a fundamental idea, I think it's worthwhile doing. And most of what I'm going to tell you now is written up on my website in an article called Omnipotence and Evil, Part 1. One of the things that we say about the Creator is that He's all-powerful. And many people will tell you all-powerful means He could do anything. On the other hand, Jewish sources that talk about it all refuse to say that God could make square circles, or God could make a square whose diagonal was equal in length to a side. The Rambam says it in Part 3, Chapter 15 of the Guide. The Malbim says it when he's talking about the miracle of stopping the Jordan River. And though not everyone discusses the question, I don't know of any source which disagrees and says that we would describe God as doing things like that. So, if you are convinced at the outset that God is all-powerful, and that all-powerful means He could do anything, these sources should be disturbing. Why are they limiting God in this way? Why are they refusing to include in God's capabilities things like this? What's stopping them? Now, if you look at the Rambam in 3:15, he gives an explanation which I have no clue how to understand. He says, the impossible has a fixed nature, and because it has a fixed nature, we do not describe God as doing the impossible. That's all he says. I don't know what fixed nature means, and I don't know how to square it with the intuitive idea of being all-powerful. But I do know how to give the idea a modern explanation. So I'm not claiming that this is the explanation in the classical Jewish sources, but it's a modern explanation which I think is quite adequate and explains how you can refuse to assert that God can make square circles. Yeah, I said it the long way, not the short way. I meant it the long way. I didn't say He can't. I said I refuse to say that He can. But they're different. You'll see that they're different. And even though we refuse to say that He can, we're not limiting Him in any way. But before I get to that, let me try a couple of examples on you. So I know I owe to a friend of mine named Yehuda Gelman, which maybe will soften up your intuition a little bit, sort of loosen up the commitment that you have to the idea that God could do anything. There seem to be examples of things that really could be done, which we don't want to say God can do. We're very uncomfortable to say that God can do. For example, I think it would be uncomfortable to say that God can learn something new. Now, learning something new is a genuine ability. Everyone in this room has it. But God doesn't have it. We have the ability and He doesn't. Or more generally, let's take the ability to improve. There is a genuine ability to improve. Everyone in this room has it. We have it and He doesn't. Do you want to say that God could learn something new? Do you want to say that God could improve? I don't think so. Now why not? Let's figure it out. Well, let's see. If we said God could learn something new, that would mean that before He learned it, He didn't know it. Oh. And that would mean before he learned it, he wasn't omniscient. Didn't know everything. That doesn't sound right. If we said that God could improve, that would mean before he improved, he wasn't perfect. That doesn't sound right either. So do we really want to say that God could do anything and everything? Now here the diagnosis is not too difficult. There are some abilities which are only possessed by imperfect beings. The ability to learn something new is possessed only by a being who doesn't already know everything, and that's an imperfection. The same with the ability to improve. It's only possessed by a being who's not perfect. What we're really committed to in our concept of God is perfection. What we should have said more cautiously was, of course God can do everything that a perfect being should be able to do, because his power and abilities are an aspect of his perfection. It just turns out, inconveniently, that some powers and abilities imply imperfection. So the intuition, we've got to give him every power and every ability because we want to protect his perfection. If we really give him every power and every ability, we're going to destroy his perfection. So say, okay, we didn't really think it through, and we shouldn't have said that. It really didn't mean that he could do everything and anything. We meant he could do everything and anything that a perfect being should be able to do. But already now, the commitment to his being able to do everything is already limited, because we see that there's some cases where we don't want to say it. The explanation I'm going to go into now with respect to square circles isn't like that, but at least it shows that you can't just blindly say he can do everything, because there may be certain considerations which have to be taken into account to make sense out of it. Now, the short modern answer to why we don't want to say that God can make square circles is that the phrase square circles is a contradiction. And because it's a contradiction, it doesn't describe anything. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't present something as a candidate to be done about which you could ask whether or not God can do it. Let me try to illustrate this to you with a very sort of homespun example. You're on your way to the mall, and a good friend calls you, and he says, you're on the way to the mall? Yes. Can you do me a favor, pick up something for me? I guess so, Tell me what you want. He says, please pick up for me a square circle. What would you do? Where would you look? How much money would you spend? I think when he says to you, please pick up for me a square circle, you say, what? I don't get it, sorry. A square circle? If that's the only description you can give me, I can't help you because I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you could describe it in other terms or elaborate in some way, but when you say square circle, nothing lights up under my cranium, nothing's going on inside here. It's just, I don't know where to start. Because square circle doesn't describe to me anything to be done, anything to be possessed, anything to be bought. It just doesn't work. To me, it's no worse than saying, or no better than saying, please get me a blah. I said, what? A blah, please get me one. Suppose someone, he says to you, you're not willing to get me a square circle? You're so ungenerous. You're so selfish. Why aren't you willing to help me? I think you'd say, I'm ready to walk to the moon for you, but I don't know what to do. Your words don't give me any instruction what you want from me. If you want me to do it, you got to speak to me in my language and explain to me what you want. Square circle doesn't do that. Doesn't explain anything to me. Okay, so now, if a person asks, can God make a square circle? The appropriate response is not yes, And the appropriate response is not no. The appropriate response is what? What linguists call the bizarreness response. You know, where you pronounce some syllables and the local speaker goes, huh? Helpless. The bizarreness response. So, go back to what I said 6 minutes ago. I wouldn't say God can't make square circles. I wouldn't say that. Because that pretends that square circles make sense, that can or cannot make square circles, one of them is correct, and the correct thing to say is that he can't make square circles. I wouldn't say it that way. Because that pretends that it makes sense, that there's a proposition there that you could decide about, and you could make up your mind, and you say the right answer is this. Whereas I think the correct response is you haven't asked a question. You haven't asked a question because you haven't used meaningful language to express your question. Any more than if someone said, can God blah? The right way to respond to that, can God blah, is not to say yes, not to say no, but to say, sorry, you haven't succeeded in asking a question. So I think that's the right way to explain why we won't say God can make square circles. We won't say it because square circles doesn't give any description of something to be made. And that because I won't say it because it makes no sense. I also won't say that God can't make square circles. I won't say either of them. Because when you put square circles at the end, you haven't succeeded in saying anything at all. So it's not true, it's not false, it's just not meaningful. I don't say that every modern philosopher would agree with this, but some do, like Hilary Putnam and others, who are great philosophers. And I think it's an easy, direct way to explain why it is that we're not going to say this. Now, let me answer what comes to people's minds intuitively and show you why it doesn't fit. And if you have questions, I'll talk about it, and then I'll talk about one of the important applications of it. People say, I don't see why you're saying that. God's all-powerful. Nothing can stand up to God. Nothing can oppose God. Whatever strength logic has, whatever binding nature logic has, can't be stronger than God. Indeed, didn't God create logic? And if God created logic, he's not subject to the rules of logic. He made them. He has the authority to make them. He has the authority to transcend them. Why are you telling me that here's where God's logic, God's power stops? And up to here, but beyond this, God's power can't make the facts the way he wants to make them. That's not what we're saying. We're not talking about God's power at all. We're not talking about his ability stopping at any limit at all. We're not talking about God's limitations, we're talking about our limitations. One of our limitations is, if we want to discuss an issue, we're going to raise a question, we have to make sense. We have to use language that makes sense. If we don't, then we have failed to communicate. It's not his fault that we've failed to communicate. It's our fault. It's not as if there's something he can't do. It's we haven't succeeded in describing anything. So we haven't set up a question of what he can and cannot do. We just failed to communicate. We failed to make sense. That doesn't limit his power at all. The rules of logic on this picture are the rules of making sense when you talk. Let's say, I'll give you a parallel, two parallels, and see if these help. Can God win a game of chess by moving his knight 3 steps forward and taking off your queen? Well, you can't win a game of chess that way because that's not how the knight moves, you know? It moves like an L. Oh, what do you mean can't? After all, God's more powerful than you are. You can't, but he can. No limits to what God can do. Sure, there's no limits to what he can do, but it's not chess. Because the rules of chess don't allow that. So it's not a chess move. I'll give you another example. Maybe I hope these examples help intuitively. I want you to meet George. George is a portrait painter. I claim he is the universal portrait painter. He can paint any person, any race, any ethnic background. He can paint any expression, male, female, old, young, healthy, ill. He is a universal portrait painter. He can paint any portrait. And somebody says, oh no, Rabbi, you're making a terrible mistake. I know a portrait that he can't make, a portrait of Santa Claus. Let's see, George, make a portrait of Santa Claus. Well, now, I hope I'm not breaking your hearts. There is no Santa Claus? I mean, are we on the same page? Right? So a portrait is a picture of a living person. That's what a portrait is. So when he says George has limitations, he can't make a portrait of Santa Claus, is he expressing a limitation on George? No, because George is a portrait painter, and every person's portrait he can paint. Santa Claus isn't a person, isn't anything. So the fact that there's no portrait of Santa Claus isn't because George is out of power when it comes to Santa Claus. It's because Santa Claus doesn't describe a portrait to be made. It's talking outside the realm of the whole activity. So when he said that George can't make a portrait of Santa Claus, we're not describing limits on George's painting ability. When we say we're not going to assert that God could make a square circle, it's not because square circles are beyond his ability, because when we say square circles, we haven't described anything to do. It's our fault, not his fault. So this is the reason why we don't, I'm saying the reason, a modern explanation for why we don't say that God can do things when what you're using to describe the thing is a self-contradictory proposition. Are we together so far? Yeah.
Just a couple of questions on some of the things we said so far. So all the Jewish sources which do say that God, cannot or does not, however we understand it, do the impossible. Do they then believe there has to be explanation as to how every miracle that we know occurred in history has to have been possible?
Okay, let's take miracles. Now, there's a gigantic gap between miracles on the one hand and what I'm talking about on the other hand. Miracles are things which violate natural laws. But we understand the description perfectly well. We understand it well enough to say that natural laws don't allow that. And when it happens, you say, well, maybe we have to change our picture of what the natural laws are. The language is perfectly well understood. It's just that we think there are laws that tell us this can't happen. That's where a person could complain. How strong are these laws? Didn't God create those laws? Why can't he break those laws? That would be a limitation on his power. Because we're describing something to be done, and we're giving a reason why it can't be done. Right? Quantum mechanics says that there's no absolute zero. Used to be a question, what would happen to hydrogen? It would be a liquid. Would it freeze at absolute zero? Would it not freeze at absolute zero? Quantum mechanics says the absolute zero is a physical impossibility. Because you can't completely stop the motion of something, because then you would have, it would be in a definite place and a definite velocity at a time. According to quantum mechanical laws for the universe, that can't be. Well, that shouldn't stop God. But here, what it is that we are considering to be done is described in terms that aren't meaningful terms. If I ask you to get something that's stationary, you know what I want. It's a question whether I can get it or you can't get it. When I ask you to get a square circle, at that point you say, I don't know what you want. I don't know what you mean. We know what stationary means. We know stationary means well enough to say that quantum mechanics says it can't be. But here, with square circles, nothing you can do. So I think that here you're talking about a logical contradiction, not just something which is forbidden by certain types of laws that run the world. Yeah.
I want to try to understand the Rambam. So a thing with an unfixed nature, like let's say a person. The category of person can have the qualities of like female or male, or it can evolve into adult from baby. So there's some play there. Whereas, say, the category of nothingness is like always locked into non-existence. Maybe impossibility shares a quality with nothingness that is non-existent, and it's uniform. It has no flexibility. It can't branch out to other things like the category of person can. Is that maybe...
I don't think those descriptions, I wouldn't use those descriptions at all. It's sort of like saying that And why would you think that the category of person was changing when you go from baby to adult? The category isn't changing. It's not branching out into anything else.
Well, there's flexibility. Like if I
The flexibility, there are differences among the things that are in the category, like ball. There are big balls and small balls, purple balls and yellow balls, solid balls and flexible balls, but they're all balls. And it's not strange that there are balls with different qualities. Ball is the name for a type of thing, and among the things of that type, there are variations in other qualities other than being a ball.
So it would be that impossibility is uniform. There's only one object of impossibility, and so you can't.
But now you switch from nothingness to impossibility.
No, I was using nothingness as a way to like share a property over from nothingness to impossibility, and impossibility is a uniform thing.
I say, I don't see any connection whatsoever. Nothingness is an alternative. Indeed, there are the physics of empty universes. Indeed, Kurt Gödel solved the Einstein equations for an empty universe that's rotating. You can imagine such a thing, right? No matter, no energy, and it's rotating, right? And whether, I mean, the way you used evolve, it won't be parallel. But I don't see any connection between nothingness on the one hand and one of the oldest and most difficult questions, and Patsy Lawrence Krauss, who thinks he's answered, isn't know what he's talking about. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's one of the oldest philosophical questions, goes back to the Greeks, and the vast majority, I think all competent philosophers agree that we don't have an answer to that question.
I tried to solve one can of worms by
Yeah.
a can of worms.
Even though Peter van Inwagen has a very interesting paper on the subject on the basis of probability, but okay. So nothingness is an idea, and something is an idea, and ideas we understand fairly well, and we can ask questions with them, and we know where we have problems that are unsolved. I mean, it's a meaningful discourse, and it's not. And I don't think that it doesn't lead to a result for the impossible at all. Yeah.
So two quick questions, just on what we said before, that for the explanation we gave for miracles are things that are not. They're logical. They're just maybe impossible according to the laws of nature. What about the particular miracle? I think we just had it in a recent parsha with where it says by Hashem spoke to the Dibros. He said one thing and he was saying two things at the same time. Doesn't that seem like a logical impossibility?
Well, I don't see why. Two people could speak at the same time, couldn't they? And if two people spoke at the same time, you would have two sets of words occurring at the same time. It's not impossible that two sets of words could be in existence at the same time, sound waves merging with one another, and they're far enough for me, and I'm in a certain direction where I get the two of them together. They'll interfere with one another. I won't understand it, probably. That's one thing. And it's impossible for my mouth to speak two sets of words at the same time. But it's not a logical impossibility, it's a physical impossibility. If I had two heads or I had two tongues, maybe I could do it. So I don't see the. But what you really ought to ask here is something like the verse in the Torah that at Sinai they saw the sounds. They saw the sounds. Now in our vocabulary, seeing sounds is just as bad as square circles. You don't see sounds. It's the wrong sensory modality. And don't talk to me about synesthesia. In synesthesia, yeah, I know about synesthesia. The synesthesia is where someone blows a trumpet and you hear the trumpet and you see red. But you hear trumpet and you see red. You don't see trumpet. And we know there's a neuroscientist in San Diego who did studies as to where the neurons are that carry the visual and the auditory sense, and some places they're fairly close together, and they can intermingle, and they can affect one another. But that's not seeing sounds, that's hearing sounds and seeing colors. We're talking about seeing sounds. I think the right way to respond to a sentence like that is, I don't know what it means. But I do know this. The words that it uses are such that it doesn't describe anything that happens to me. Because things that happen to me, I have words to describe. If those words were true of them, it's something for them that I have no clue of what it is. And it's good to know something happened there that doesn't happen to me. So different from what happens to me that the words that have to be used to describe what happened to them are words that aren't meaningful to me. The right thing to say about them is, I don't know what they mean, but because they're in the Torah, I know they mean something, I know they're true. My example, my parallel with this is, let me give the parallel, no, I'll take yours. Let's suppose I'm attached to Einstein, and I'm following around the world, giving lectures, and I'm an expert in relativity, and when people have questions, sometimes I answer them for Einstein. We go to China, he gets up at the podium, and he starts talking Chinese. I said, wow, I didn't know Einstein could talk Chinese. Look at that, And he's giving the lecture, right? Of course, I don't understand Chinese. Midway through the lecture, somebody grabs my arm and says, is what Einstein just said true? So I said, well, I don't understand Chinese, so I don't know what he just said, but listen, it's Einstein. I'm sure it was right. I'm sure it was true. Because he knows his stuff, and he's serious, and he says, I know he gives this lecture. So whatever it is that he said, whatever he meant, I'm sure that it's true. I think a similar attitude towards the whole people saw the voices. I don't know what it means. With my vocabulary, it doesn't say anything to me. It's words that aren't meaningful to me. But it's in the Torah, so it's got to be true, and it's describing something that's utterly foreign to my experience. And that's the point of it. The point of it is to tell you that what happened to them at Sinai doesn't happen to you or me. It's something totally beyond our experience. And there's certain lessons to learn from that. So we're not going to compromise our refusal to give meaning to contradictions. We're going to refuse to give meaning to contradictions. When we find contradictory statements, we're not going to say they're meaningless. What we're going to say is that they don't mean anything to me. And they don't mean anything to me, then they can't be used to communicate to me. The same thing's true if somebody says, why don't you say God can make square circles? I'll tell you why I don't say it. Because if I said it, I would be saying something I don't understand. The words would have meaningless to me. I'd just be reciting, a mantra. And that's not communication, it's not thought, it's not understanding, it's just a mistake. Yeah, second question.
So, the square circle, you're comparing to the same sound. So, theoretically, could Hashem make a square circle? We just don't know what that square circle would be? Because if the Torah said there's a square circle, yada yada, then that's the truth. So, could Hashem make a square circle? We just don't have the capability to put meaning to exact statement, even though it is theoretically possible.
Let's start with the comparison that I made before. Let's try your questions with the example that I gave before. Could God make a blah? Is it possible to make a blah? I mean, I don't know what a blah is, but maybe a blah could be made by God. Why do you want to say God can't make a blah? The answer is because when I talk, I have responsibility to make sense when I talk. And blah isn't a part of my language. It's not a meaningful word at all in my language. So, they say, but maybe blah means something in Sinhalese. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe blah is a sound that is a word in Sinhalese. And maybe in Sinhalese it has a meaning. That's fine. I don't mind. But you're asking me to talk and me to give a judgment and say something about the subject. It's not a word in my language. So it's not a word in my language. I can't use it to talk about any subject at all. Same with square circle. And I hear somebody else saying square circle and I trust him, then I say, well, he certainly means something by it, but I haven't a clue what he means. I can't say anything about it because to me it doesn't mean anything. To me I can say the sounds, but there's no idea behind the sounds. I'm not communicating. Communicating is communicating a meaning to someone. I can't do that because for me it has no meaning. So now I learned, it's like hearing someone speaking Sinhalese and he says, blah, 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 blah. I think, wow, look what he's doing. He's saying blah, blah, blah. Must mean something to them, because otherwise he wouldn't waste his time saying it. But I can't say blah, because it doesn't mean anything to me. That's the situation that we're in. I can't use it to understand. I can't use it to communicate. Maimonides says in part 1, chapter 50, that there are people who are very concerned about what to say. What words should I use? But they're not concerned to ask whether there's an idea behind the words that they use. Part of communication is to communicate ideas, or for yourself to formulate ideas in your mind, to understand things, and being fixated on what to say isn't good enough. And he makes a comparison there, a bitter comparison. He talks about Jews who recognize that we have many descriptions of God, many qualities that we ascribe to God, like omnipotence and omniscience and kindness and justice and so forth and so on. And they are many different qualities. And when confronted with the Shema, which says God is one, and they're challenged, why are you ascribing to God many qualities if he's one? And they say, well, there are many qualities for people, but for God, those many qualities are one. In God, the many is one. And he says, they're just as off track as the Christians are. Those who say that 3 is 1 and 1 is 3 and 3 is 1 and 1 is 3, and have to understand that 1 is 3 and 3 really is 1 and they're both 3 and 1 together. And these are people who are committed to finding the right words to say, but they have no commitment to find understanding behind the words. That's not understanding. You can't believe what you don't understand, and you can't mean it, and therefore it's not a candidate for discussion.
If we can't believe what we don't understand, then how can we believe that they saw sound at Sinai? I think I'm just misunderstanding something.
No. It's a fair question. Well, and the way to do it is the way I did it with Einstein. Is what he just said true? So the correct thing to say is, I don't know what he said. I don't know what he said. But I know he's reliable, so whatever he said, I'm sure it's right. It's just that I don't know what it is. Now, do I believe what he said? No, I do not. I don't understand what he said. I just believe that whatever it is, it's true. So I don't have the belief of the meaning. For me, it has no meaning. So when, it's very interesting, the Ramban had a disputation with a Jew who became a Christian because he was forced to by the king of Aragon, who was pushed by the priests. And at the end of the disputation, he's been answering questions for 3 days. And he says, I've been answering for 3 days. Do I get a chance to ask a question? So the king checks with the priest. Says, yeah, you can ask a question. So he says, you guys believe in 3 in 1. Is it like 3 peas in a pod? No. Like 3 qualities in one object? No. He says, okay, you tell me. Tell me what you mean when you say 3 in 1. And the fellow answers, we don't understand what it means, we just believe it.
This sounds like
And the Ramban says, if you don't understand it, you can't believe it. Now, there he's claiming to believe that God is 3 and God is 1. That is to say, he's claiming to believe a proposition. If he had taken what the 20th century in philosophy called a linguistic turn, if he had taken a step up and said, listen, here's some words. God is 3 and God is 1. I believe that those words describe a correct fact. I'm going to a clue what the fact is. I don't know what the fact is, but I believe that those words describe some correct fact or other. If he did that, we'll be fine. That's not what he said. He claimed to believe the fact, and there's no fact behind it. There's no meaning behind it. There's no understanding behind it. Belief is about a meaning. It's about an understanding. It's not a belief about what words to say. That's not a belief.
So with your example of Einstein speaking in Chinese, you don't believe in the meaning, but you know he's true.
I don't believe the meaning because I don't know the meaning.
But isn't that blind faith to say, oh, he's correct, even though you don't necessarily understand what he's saying?
No, it's not blind faith at all. Already, even if I understood the words, I might not understand why it's true. I give credibility to someone because of his general knowledge, his general expertise, and his general behavior. Right? I think what I'm saying in the Einstein case is perfectly correct. I tell you, the Chinese speaker, to believe what he said because I know Einstein, I know what he does, I know what he lectures about, and I'm sure that whatever he said was true. That's certainly reasonable. I have very good reason to think that. Even though if he asked me, well, what did he say? I said, I don't know. And, do you believe the proposition? I may not have heard it from him, so I don't know if I believe it or not. Right? Because those words don't have any meaning for me. Yeah.
So what do we mean as Jews by God's oneness? Is that it's just his complete subtlety over the world?
It's a long, complicated subject. In the guide is part 1, chapters 50 through 60, and what you end up with is that God has no meaningful qualities at all, and that requires a lot of explanation and how we talk about God and all the rest of that. That's but because of that, I mean, in person says your question is spot on, because what you end up saying is to describe what God is beyond us entirely. We have no way to do that directly. He's what's called transcendent. He's beyond all of our categories and beyond all of our descriptions.
The descriptions we give him are just for us to try and understand.
Okay, so I'll just tell you what he says in 154. What we describe is what God does, but not what God is. And he says that word for word in 154, the Rambam. Describe what he does, not what he is. So all the descriptions which look like they're descriptions of what he is have to be translated into descriptions of what he does. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah.
What if someone has a non-verbal understanding of a concept and they can't articulate it in words, but they commit themselves in words to an understanding that they can't articulate, and then it turns out that an update in their language makes it so that the understanding that they had non-verbally can suddenly be communicated verbally, and that resolves an apparent contradiction?
Well, first of all, I think I would agree with you. There is nonverbal understanding. I think that's demonstrable. But the process you describe, having a nonverbal understanding and then attaching words to it, can't solve the problem of a contradiction.
Right.
But that's what you said.
No.
Not slowly. That's what you said. You said maybe that could solve the problem of a contradiction. It can't solve the problem of the contradiction because at the level of a nonverbal understanding, a contradiction can't be raised. Contradiction, by definition, is a verbal problem. Without words, you're not going to have a contradiction. Number one. And number two, I think you have to be a little bit careful here, because a person is in some state or other, LSD induced or not, hypnosis induced or not, meditation induced or not, starvation induced or not. If he calls it nonverbal understanding rather than emotion or some other kind of word, there has to be a reason to say that it's nonverbal understanding rather than something else. Now, the process that you described, I think, is one of the good tests. If this nonverbal understanding can either be later formulated in words or even more subtly can give rise to consequences in words. Because of this thing here, I say XYZ. Because of this thing here, I say PQR. Because of this thing here, I say ABC. And that happens over and over again. If I can derive verbal information from this nonverbal thing, then there may be a good reason to call it understanding. But if I can't, why call it understanding at all? Why not just call it emotion or feeling or sensation or something else? What gets it the title of understanding?
People grasp things visually that can be very hard to articulate. I wouldn't call that emotion necessarily, or something that...
Well, okay, but what you grasp visually can usually, I would say almost always, be translated into words. Get me the third book from the left. Right? I'll get the book that I want because I see where it is. I know the words will tell it what to do, what I want him to do. So there's a verbal offshoot from the vision, and that one of the things that qualifies it as understanding rather than something else. Yeah.
So, just quickly before my main question, actually, just on the sound, on when the Gottleib heard sounds, and this may just be coming from my own ignorance, but can't we just simply understand that as sound is, we know sound are waves, towers and physical things can't pick them up. They are a thing that's in the world. So why can't we just say that they were visible? It's not as if sound waves aren't an extant physical thing in the world.
You're right. You're right that if what a sound wave is systematic motion of air particles, that's what a sound wave is. And it's appropriate, I would say, to say that the sound, what we call the sound wave, is the sound. There's a lot of philosophy of science in that, but I think that's okay. But our commentators don't take it that way. Our commentators take it that you're seeing that which is heard. And they take that as an absolute contradiction. So in this case, it wouldn't be a contradiction. They take it as a statement of something which is a contradiction. By the way, not all agree to that. The Rambam says that the verb there, to see, really means to perceive. And he has a proof for it. Re'ei re'ach b'ni k're'ach sadeh asher berecho Hashem. When Isaac comes in for a blessing, when Jacob comes in for a blessing, Isaac says, Re'ei, the aroma of my son, which is the aroma of a field that God has blessed. And the verb that's used there is re'ei, which means to see. You don't see aromas, do you? You smell aromas. So the Rambam says clearly the word re'ei means to perceive, and perceive with any of the senses. So it's not a problem at all. That means he's not, in at least that comment, not following what Chazal say as roim as anishma. And by the way, there is a source that says not only did they see that which is heard, but they heard that which is seen. It was a cross between both senses. So I think that although you could resolve it that way, that's not the way the tradition takes it. I mean, it wouldn't be. Anyway, that's enough for that. Yeah, you're good.
Two questions. First, what would it mean to perceive, since
the word perceive means usually to detect through any of the senses, any of the five senses, and it means more than just to detect. Perception is a very complex process, and I'm a realist with respect to perception, so it has built into it the conditions of satisfaction for an object and the causality that the object is bringing about the very experience that you're having. All that's built into the idea of a perception, where sensation is much thinner than that. So it's a complicated subject. It's not something we can go into now. But perception is different from is broad because it covers tactile sensation and auditory sensation and visual sensation and gustatory sensation of taste and odors as well. Perception covers all five.
But also, I mean, just how do we understand that when, for example, when you use the tefillin,
Yeah.
we do know that there is like a part in the brain, no? that the eye, it's in this part of the cortex,
Frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex.
So,
You mean the optical cortex?
so is there anything to see through, or only the eyes are the only, let's say, way through which we see literally in the sense?
No, I don't think the optical cortex is not something that's related to vision in that way. It's like this: you type a document in Word. Okay, it's stored on the hard drive. Can you open up the hard drive with a gigantic microscope and see the letters of the document? No. There are no little letters hidden in there. Sorry. No one with a microscope and the knowledge of the English letters will find your document in there. It's coded in voltages. That's all it is. So it's not there like a picture. When people used to make this mistake of thinking that what the eye does is it takes a picture of the world and transmits the picture to the brain. But of course, you're looking at the picture of the world, you look at the world, and then it brings a picture to the brain. Somebody in the brain's got to look at the picture. And what does he look at it with? An eye, huh? Which brings a picture to his brain. That's called the endless homunculus chase, It goes on forever. It can't be that way because at the end, the picture has to be translated into something other than a picture so you can do something with it. In particular, you got to move your muscles with it, right? You can't move your muscles with ink. You can't move your muscles with paint. You move your muscles with electrical charges. So somebody looks in your brain, you're looking at a picture, no one will see the picture in the brain. There's no eye in there. There's just electrical impulses which are affected by these eyes and create impulses in the brain which then enable you to do something. It's not, okay, so I didn't get to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, but let me just mention the application. For us, it's an extremely important application. When we describe why God made the world that He made, in particular, let's say why He made evil. Maybe you don't think He made evil. Okay, we could talk about that. I have a whole share on that. Maybe we'll get to it someday. But the nature of the answer is He made evil in order to accomplish something. The ultimate good that he wants to do for people required, that's the tricky word, required that he make evil as part of the means to getting to the good. At this point, go back to the very beginning of this year. What do you mean, required? Had to do, couldn't get there without. I'm talking about God. God is all powerful. Maybe the doctor in the 50s who inoculated the child against disease had to use a needle and cause him pain because the pills weren't invented yet. We don't do it anymore. The doctor was limited. He couldn't do it without a needle, so he had to cause pain. But you wouldn't say that God used the needle because he couldn't do it without pain. God could do it without pain, doesn't need the needle. You're telling me God created evil because he needed it. It was necessary as a means to getting to the good he wants to present to us in the end. Why should it be necessary? Let him just skip over the evil and give us the good without the evil. That's a very good question. The answer, I believe, which I have done on it's recorded, I've done it in detail, is that when you take a good look at the good that he wants to do and see what it means, and then propose getting that good without the evil means, that proposition, getting the good without the evil means, is equivalent to square circle. The means is built into the definition of the good. It's built into the nature of the good in such a way that proposing to get the good without the evil means is proposing a square circle, which isn't a serious proposal, as I've shown you. So this idea that we don't ask whether God can make square circles, we don't ask why he doesn't make square circles, we don't ask those things because it's not meaningful, it will be equally meaningless to ask why doesn't he get to the ultimate good without the evil means, because the evil means is built into the very nature of the good that needs to be accomplished. So in that way, you're protected from that objection to the explanation why God made evil. I think that's a very important logical move. Yeah.
Is a melech alluding something to what a lesser good would have been, like a good created without an evil, or is it just
Melech?
a means, like
King?
an angel? Sorry, I mean an angel.
A malach.
Or is an angel just part of the means to create the ultimate good for us?
Part of the means to make the ultimate good for us, of course. Everything is created in order to give the ultimate good to us.
So it's not just like an instance of a good in which evil wasn't necessary, and so, but you still give it a purpose and give it existence that's worthwhile. Because you could, in theory, give something an existence which doesn't require a good that doesn't require evil. It would just be a lesser good. It wouldn't be the ultimate good.
Yes, that's true. That's absolutely true. If God had been satisfied with horses, then he wouldn't have had to make this world. This world is made so that we can earn what he wants to give us. Horses don't earn anything. You feed them and they're happy, right? The trouble is that a horse is utterly unlike the Creator, shares no essential qualities with the Creator, and the ultimate good that he can give us is to make us as like him as possible, because he is the ultimate good. And he is what he is. This is part 2 of the way of God. And one of the things about him that's essential is he is what he is because of himself. And if he gave us the good without our earning it ourselves, we'd just be superior horses, like some people believe that we're just superior animals, huh? Human unexceptionalism, huh? Right? But we understand that human beings are not just superior animals. We could be godlike in ways that animals cannot be godlike. We're created in God's form, B'Tselem Elokim, as it says in the first chapter of Genesis. Nothing else is created B'Tselem Elokim, not even angels. They're inferior to us in that respect. Yeah.
I might not be wording this correctly, but if the evil means is built into the very nature of the good that God is accomplishing, then are God's powers somehow subordinate to the nature of that good?
That's also a good question. Let me answer you sort of programmatically. When you say that God is good, you have to ask exactly what you're talking about. Let's for the purposes of this discussion, maybe we could go outside the other, but let's, for the purpose of this discussion, talk about God as an agent and say that he's a perfectly good agent. Everything he does is perfectly good. Now let's suppose that you have an agent who's in a situation where the only way that he can get a very good outcome is to use an evil means to do so. And he has no option better than that. The best possible option is to use an evil means to create a greater good. Now when he chooses that, would you say, well, he's not a perfect agent because look at this. In his agency, he's done evil. When a person chooses the best possible option, that is perfection for an agent. An agent who always does the best possible thing is the best possible agent. He's a perfect agent. There's nothing that you could say he should have done better or differently. So if you think of God as agency, the agency of creating evil will be no compromise whatsoever in the perfection of his agency.
Is God an agency?
Why not? I mean, God is the one who creates the world, runs the world, rewards and punishes. God's agency is ubiquitous. Right? The only question you can ask is maybe there's something behind the agency. What about the agent who's performing the agency? And then I'll come back to what I said over here, that we don't go behind that, because that's off limits for talking altogether. But I think that if God's agency is perfect, it would be very difficult to have a complaint against it. Right? You know, again, I'm citing things from philosophy which are somewhat controversial, but one of the things that when you criticize someone for what he did, that one of the responses is, well, what would you have had me do? If you think you have a critique against what I did, at least explain to me what alternative I had that would have been better. If there isn't any alternative that I had that was better, then you have no critique of what I did. That would mean his agency is perfect. It's impossible to express a critique. Yeah, last question.
Just going back to the very beginning of this year, the Rabbi mentioned how numerous commentaries established that what we are most importantly committed to when discussing God is his perfection, and that's why, in the face of a question like could he improve or could he learn something new, we say no because we're committed to his perfection.
That's right.
From where do we know that indeed the answer to that is to defend the perfection as opposed to say yes, he could grow and maybe.
I think the answer comes. I think the answer is it comes from the initial resistance. If I say God isn't really all powerful, there are some things he can't do. If I say that, just blank, right? You're going to resist. Why are you going to resist? Maybe you just can't do everything. What's wrong with that? Because you're starting from the idea that he's perfect. And because he's perfect, he shouldn't be limited. And because if he's not limited, then he should be able to do anything. You're starting from the idea of perfection. That's where your commitment to his being able to do everything comes from. And I say, well, your very commitment to perfection, which motivates your statement he can do everything, that very same motivation leads to the conclusion that he can't do everything. So you're in trouble. Not I have to prove it from the outside, but where you're coming from, you have to make a choice because you can't have it all work. I think that's where we're starting. Okay, so on Thursday we're starting free will. Yes, Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.